At 1:30 on a January morning in Calgary, when the temperature had dropped to -22, and the lot outside the 24-hour pharmacy on McLeod Trail sat mostly empty, and still, Malcolm Stirling noticed the white SUV parked at the far edge, away from every light. He had just finished his overnight custodian shift at the Provincial Services building across the road and was cutting through the lot to reach his truck. The way he did most mornings when the cold made the long route feel pointless. He noticed the SUV the way a person notices something that is slightly wrong without being able to name exactly what is wrong about it. The engine was off. Frost was already forming at the corners of the windshield. Someone was inside. Malcolm was 41 years old, broad across the shoulders from years of lifting things nobody thanked him for lifting, and he had the particular stillness of a man who had learned that the world moved at its own pace regardless of how loudly a person asked it to hurry. His wife, Carolyn, had died 3 years earlier from a fast and ruthless illness, and since then he had arranged his life around two things: his daughter Opal, who was 10 years old and opinionated about everything, and the custodian work that kept the rent paid on their apartment in Forest Lawn. He drove a pickup truck that needed new brake pads and smelled faintly of industrial floor cleaner. He was not a man accustomed to complications. He stood on the cold pavement and told himself several reasonable things. The person in the SUV might be sleeping between shifts. The person might not want to be approached by a stranger in the middle of the night. Opal was at Mrs. Nakamura's apartment 1 floor up from theirs, and Ruth Nakamura was 71 years old and a light sleeper who did not need any extra worrying placed on her account. He crossed the lot anyway. What would you do if the woman everyone had decided to discard was the only one left who could protect the people they had already forgotten? He tapped on the driver's window, gently the way you knock on the door of a room where someone might be sleeping. The woman inside woke with a sharp inhale and pressed herself against the far door. For one moment, raw fear crossed her face before something more controlled replaced it. She was perhaps in her late 30s, dark hair pulled back loosely, wearing a gray wool coat over clothing that had once been meant for a boardroom. Her eyes were sharp even through exhaustion. Malcolm raised both hands. "Sorry," he said through the glass. "I work across the road. Your windshield's icing over, and I couldn't see any exhaust. Just wanted to make sure you were all right." She stared at him. His jacket still had the government services logo on it. His breath fogged the air between them. She lowered the window 2 inches. "I'm fine." He looked at the frost collecting along the passenger side glass. "It's -22. "I'm aware. There's a Tim Hortons 2 blocks up, open all night." She looked away. "I don't need. Or you can sit in my truck with the heat on for 10 minutes. I'm not asking for anything. You look like you're about 45 minutes from hypothermia." Pride is a strange thing. It asks a person to refuse help in rooms where no one is watching, as if there is still an audience to perform for even when there is no one left. She opened the door. Her name was Elaine Burford. She told him just that much when he handed her a coffee from the Tim Hortons drive-thru and nothing more. Malcolm did not push. He turned the heat up and let the silence sit between them the way silence can sit between two people who are not enemies. Elaine Burford was 38 years old, and until 9 days ago she had been the chief medical officer of Cascade Health Partners, a network of private clinics and specialty care facilities operating across 3 provinces. She had built the clinical framework of the organization from the ground up, and before that she had spent 6 years as a rural physician in northern Saskatchewan because her father, Dr. Arthur Burford, had spent his entire career practicing medicine in small communities. She had believed in the uncomplicated way of a person who has not yet been shown why belief is expensive, that medicine was supposed to go where it was needed most. Her husband, Kevin Harmon, was a member of Cascade's board of directors. He was charming in the way that functions as a skill rather than a quality. He knew how to enter a room, how to make important people feel comfortable, how to speak the language of growth and strategic alignment. He had supported Elaine's career publicly and worked against it in private, for reasons that became clear only after she found a hotel receipt in a jacket pocket she was sending to the dry cleaner. The affair had been with Miriam Coates, Cascade's chief financial officer. But the affair was almost the least of it. What Kevin and Miriam had built together, behind Elaine's back and beneath the surface of every board meeting and quarterly report she had trusted, was a case for her removal. Fabricated billing irregularities tied to her authorization codes, statements from 2 junior administrators whose recent promotions had been approved by Kevin's committee, a psychiatric assessment, which Elaine had been told was a routine wellness review, whose conclusions described her as showing signs of impaired judgment under stress. When she confronted Kevin in their kitchen in Elbow Park, he did not deny Miriam. He told Elaine she had never understood the difference between running an organization and believing in one. The divorce filing arrived within 48 hours. So did the board's decision to place her on administrative leave pending investigation. Her access to Cascade's network was suspended. 2 colleagues she had considered friends stopped answering calls. A third told her quietly that he was sorry, but he had a family to think about. Elaine had packed 1 bag in her father's leather notebook and driven away. A hotel card was at its limit. A former colleague offered a guest room, then called back an hour later to say it wasn't a good time. She had parked first near the Bow River, then near the hospital where she had completed her residency, and finally in the pharmacy lot where Malcolm had found her. She told herself the situation was temporary. She had been telling herself that for 9 days. Malcolm drove her to the Tim Hortons and said very little. When she finished the coffee, he bought her another. He told her about Opal. Not much, just that she was 10 and currently furious with him for refusing to get a hamster, and something about that small, specific detail made Elaine's shoulders lower slightly. The way they do when a person realizes the world still contains things that have nothing to do with the disaster they are inside. He mentioned that his upstairs neighbor kept a folding cot in the storage room behind the mailboxes. Her grandson used it when he came up from Lethbridge. It wasn't much, but it was inside, and inside mattered more than pride at -22. Elaine calculated risks the way she had once calculated clinical outcomes. But her fingers had gone numb around the coffee cup, and the SUV's heater had a slow leak, and she was so tired that the variables kept blurring. "One night," she said, "while I sort things out." Ruth Nakamura took one look at Elaine Burford and immediately decided the folding cot situation was unacceptable. She produced 2 extra blankets, a bowl of miso soup from something she had inexplicably kept on the stove, and the firm opinion that whatever had brought this woman to a storage room was someone else's fault, and not something she should be apologizing for. Ruth had been raised in a community that had learned, through hard experience, that suffering was not improved by pretending it was less than it was. Elaine ate the soup, said very little, and slept for 6 hours without waking once. It was the first real sleep she had managed in over a week. Opal met her the following afternoon near the mailboxes. Opal Stirling had her father's brown eyes and her mother's habit of saying exactly what she was thinking before she had finished deciding whether to say it. "Are you staying here?" "Temporarily." Opal looked at the leather notebook tucked under Elaine's arm. "What's that?" "My father's. He was a doctor." "Is he dead?" Malcolm started to redirect, but Elaine answered yes. Opal nodded. "My mom's dead too. Dad says she's still talking to us through the stuff she left behind, like her recipes and things." She paused. "What did your dad leave behind?" Elaine opened the notebook to the first page. Her father's handwriting, careful, slightly cramped, learned in a one-room school in rural Saskatchewan, had written a single line at the top. "First, listen." Opal read it twice. "That's it?" "That's everything," Elaine said. That evening, while Malcolm reheated shepherd's pie and Elaine sat quietly at the kitchen table, the local news ran a segment on leadership changes at Cascade Health Partners. The footage showed the organization's downtown headquarters, then cut to a statement from Kevin Harmon expressing confidence in Cascade's direction and his concern for the well-being of departing senior staff. Opal looked from the screen to the woman at the table. "That's you." The apartment went very quiet. Malcolm set down the spatula. Elaine sat perfectly still in the way of someone who has learned to wait for recognition to change the people around her, because recognition always changed something. Some people became flattering, others became cautious. A few became resentful before she had said a word. Malcolm looked at her for a long moment. His expression did not shift into deference or caution or resentment. It became tired in a way that was somehow different from how tired he had been before. "You should have told me who you were." "I told you my name." "I didn't know what it meant." He paused. "I would have still helped you, but there's a silver sedan that has been parked across the street since yesterday morning, and now I understand why." Elaine moved to the window. The sedan was there, idling faintly against the curb. "Kevin's investigator. He's been documenting my movements." Malcolm's jaw tightened. He looked at Opal in the hallway, and something in his face shifted. Not anger exactly, but the particular kind of reckoning that happens when a person understands their choices have begun to affect people they did not intend to include. "You should go," he said quietly. Elaine nodded. She had expected this moment since the first one. She went to the storage room and began folding the blanket. Opal followed. "Where are you going?" "I don't know yet." Malcolm appeared in the doorway. His voice was controlled but no longer angry. The sedan stays outside. You stay inside. Tomorrow we figure out something that makes more sense. But from this point, I need to know what I'm in the middle of. Elaine looked at him and understood that this was not an offer made lightly by a man who had a daughter and overdue bills, and no spare room in his life for other people's wars. All of it, she said. I'll tell you all of it. She did that night at the kitchen table after Opal was asleep, while Malcolm drank tea and let her speak. She told him about her father's rural practice, the years in Saskatchewan, the clinical framework she had built from his notebooks. She told him about Kevin, how she had not understood until much later that he believed in what she could build for him, not what she was building. She told him about the 2 community health clinics, Cascade walk-in facilities in lower-income Calgary neighborhoods, operating on sliding scale fees, serving people who had nowhere else to go. Kevin and Miriam wanted them converted into private pay specialty centers. The Provincial Health Authority had a public review coming, an evaluation of whether Cascade's expansion plan met public interest requirements. The original framework Elaine had built explicitly protected those clinics. Kevin needed her out before the review. He needed me to appear incompetent, she said, or unstable, whichever held up. Malcolm was quiet for a moment. The review is public? Open to anyone, not to me. My access has been revoked. Does he need your permission for you to walk through the door? Elaine almost smiled. You sound like someone who thinks I need reminding. I think you've been alone in a car for 9 days, Malcolm said. Maybe you do. The days that followed were not quiet. Kevin's team arranged a press item describing Elaine's departure as evidence of the psychological toll of executive leadership. An industry blogger posted something about the irony of a healthcare executive unable to manage her own stability. Anonymous sources described her to a business columnist as erratic, unreasonable, difficult. Kevin issued a statement expressing deep sadness about the breakdown of his marriage and deep confidence in Cascade's future. Malcolm's building supervisor called him in 4 days later. Someone had submitted an anonymous complaint alleging he had used his after-hours access to allow an unauthorized person into the building. It was not true, but it placed him on a formal review, which meant no extra shifts until the matter resolved, which meant the February rent calculation became suddenly difficult. He said nothing about this when he came home. He put on a pot of pasta and sat down to help Opal with her school project. A scale model of a hockey arena built from popsicle sticks for a unit on Canadian architecture and community spaces. The arena kept collapsing. The walls won't stay, Opal said, pushing sticks around the table in frustration. Elaine, who had been sitting quietly with her father's notebook, looked at the structure. You're building the roof before the frame is secure. She sat beside Opal and rearranged the base pieces, adding triangular supports beneath the vertical load. The ice doesn't stay level if the foundation underneath isn't even. Everything rests on what nobody can see. Opal tested the revised structure with a stack of pennies it held. She studied it for a moment. You really do know about foundations. Elaine thought about her father driving remote Saskatchewan roads at 60 below to reach patients who could not reach him. She thought about the clinical framework she had built as an extension of his notebooks, each program constructed from the ground up, because the communities that needed care most could not afford to wait for programs that looked impressive before they were useful. I know about what happens when you skip them, she said. Malcolm watched from the counter. It was the first evening since Elaine had arrived that she did not look like someone surviving the room. 3 days after that, someone left a message on Malcolm's supervisor's voicemail, suggesting that his personal situation made him a liability to the building's professional environment. His supervisor was not a bad man. He was a careful one. Careful men in institutional positions do not always choose correctly when choosing correctly costs them something. Malcolm was suspended pending a completed review. He sat in his truck in the lot for exactly 1 minute of silence. Then he drove home. Elaine saw his face when he came through the door and understood without being told. I'll fix this, she said. It isn't yours to fix. Kevin's people made a phone call. My supervisor made a choice. He hung his jacket by the door. Don't turn this into a debt. I helped you because it was the right thing. Trying to pay that back changes what it was. Elaine sat with that for a long time. It was Opal's hockey arena that brought her back. She found it on the kitchen table one morning, the structure complete and reinforced, sitting beside a note written in purple marker. The base has to be even, you told me. Elaine stood at the table and did not move for several minutes. She thought about the night Kevin had watched her leave the house in Elbow Park with one bag, wearing the expression of someone overseeing the resolution of a minor administrative problem. She thought about 9 nights in a parking lot telling herself the situation was temporary. She thought about the 2 clinics and the people who walked through their doors each week, who did not know their existence was being evaluated against a spreadsheet built to make them look like liabilities. She thought about her father writing first, listen in a school notebook in a one-room schoolhouse in Saskatchewan, and what he would have made of a daughter who had listened to everyone who told her to accept the settlement, except the people whose lives depended on the framework she had built. She picked up her phone and called her lawyer. The Provincial Health Authority's public review of Cascade Health Partners' expansion proposal was held on a Thursday morning in a government building on 9th Avenue. Health officials, community representatives, investment partners, and members of the public filled the room. Kevin arrived with a prepared legal team and Miriam Coates, who wore a suit that cost more than Malcolm's monthly take-home, and the expression of someone who had already decided the outcome. Elaine arrived in a navy blazer that Ruth had borrowed from her daughter-in-law and pressed with a kitchen iron the previous night. It did not fit perfectly across the shoulders. She carried her father's leather notebook and a laptop containing 6 years of clinical data reconstructed from printed reports, public health filings, and community outcome studies. Malcolm sat in the 3rd row. Ruth sat beside him, wearing her good coat, saying nothing about why. Kevin saw Elaine cross the lobby. Something moved across his face, quickly controlled, but she caught it, and it told her everything she needed to know about whether he had expected her to come. Miriam intercepted her before she reached the registration desk. "You're not an authorized Cascade representative. I'm a licensed physician and the architect of the clinical framework this review is evaluating. I'm here as a public stakeholder. Any disclosure of confidential organizational information will be submitted as part of the public record." Elaine met her eyes. "Good morning, Miriam." Kevin's presentation was polished. He spoke about sustainable healthcare delivery, responsible fiscal stewardship, and the evolution of community health models. He described the conversion of the 2 walk-in clinics as an enhancement of care capacity. He used the phrase meeting communities where they are 3 times, which was a remarkable frequency, given that the plan would close the only affordable walk-in services in 2 of Calgary's most underserved postal codes. When the Health Authority's senior review officer, Dr. Louise Chartrand, asked about projected patient impact, Kevin's acting clinical director gave 3 answers to a question that had a single factual response, and none of them were it. Elaine stood. "I'm Dr. Elaine Burford. I designed Cascade Health Partners' community care framework and served as chief medical officer until last month." Kevin's expression went flat. "Dr. Burford is on administrative leave. Her participation here." "She's a member of the public," Dr. Chartrand said. "Dr. Burford, please continue." Elaine connected her laptop to the room's presentation system. The first screen showed Cascade's submitted utilization data for the 2 community clinics. The second showed the actual figures from Public Health Authority filings, which Cascade was required to submit quarterly as a condition of their operating license. They were not the same numbers. The difference was not a rounding error or a classification question. The submitted data had excluded walk-in patients seen under the province's uninsured visitor program, a category that made up 31% of the clinic's monthly caseload. Without those patients, the clinics appeared underutilized. With them, they were operating near capacity. That category was removed from Cascade's internal reporting system 14 months ago, Elaine said. "Here is the internal memo authorizing the reclassification." She displayed it on the screen. Miriam Coates' name was in the header. Kevin's authorization was in the footer. The room became very quiet. Kevin rose. "That document is proprietary Cascade material. It was included in the compliance package submitted to the Provincial Health Registry under standard disclosure requirements. It is part of the public record." Dr. Chartrand asked Kevin to explain the discrepancy. Kevin looked at Miriam. Miriam was looking at the screen. Elaine continued. She walked through the original community care framework. Her father's model, adapted for urban delivery, built to serve the populations most likely to fall through the gaps of a private health system. She showed the provincial outcome data demonstrating the 2 clinics had prevented an estimated 240 emergency room visits in the past year alone. She showed the financial model demonstrating that, at accurate utilization figures, both clinics operated within acceptable cost parameters without conversion. She showed finally an internal email that Kevin had sent to a board consultant 11 months prior, preserved automatically in a regulatory disclosure package. In it, Kevin wrote that the utilization reclassification would allow the board to demonstrate clinic non-viability ahead of the expansion review. She read it aloud. "That is taken completely out of context," Kevin said. Elaine read the next line. "Once the community model appears unsustainable, we can proceed with conversion without the optics problem." The silence that followed was the kind that does not come from absence of sound. It comes from a room full of people understanding something at the same moment. Every allegation Kevin had made against her hung inside it: erratic, unstable, unsuitable, emotional. Each one had served a single purpose: to make integrity look like incompetence so that competence could go unexamined. Dr. Chartrand called a recess. Community representatives who had traveled to the hearing from the affected neighborhood sat without speaking. Malcolm, in the third row, looked at his hands. When the recess ended, Dr. Chartrand announced that the expansion proposal was suspended pending an independent audit of Cascade's submitted utilization data. The audit would be conducted by an external firm. Cascade's board would provide documentation related to the reclassification decision, including all communications between board members and the CFO's office. Kevin's legal team filed an immediate objection. It was noted for the record. Elaine walked back to her seat. Malcolm handed her a bottle of water. "You're shaking," he said quietly. "I'm aware." He said nothing more. He had learned, over the weeks she had been in and out of his apartment, that the best thing he could offer in certain moments was simply to remain in them. The audit confirmed the data manipulation within 6 weeks. 2 board members resigned before the findings were publicly released. Miriam faced regulatory complaints from the Provincial Health Authority related to her role in approving the reclassification. Kevin's board position became untenable. He resigned with a statement about pursuing other opportunities that convinced no one. Forensic accounting retained by Elaine's legal team identified assets Kevin had moved in the months preceding the formal divorce filing, assets that had not appeared in his initial disclosure. A court order restored access to the joint accounts. Another dismissed the fabricated misconduct findings. The house in Elbow Park was no longer something Kevin could offer or withhold. He requested a meeting before the divorce was finalized. He arrived at the mediator's office without his usual certainty. His suit was pressed, but he sat in the chair as if it were less comfortable than he had expected. "You could have handled this privately," he said. "You handled it publicly. You used the press and the board and a psychiatric assessment to turn my career into evidence against me. You chose public first. I was protecting the company." "You were protecting access to the company." She paused. "They're not the same thing." Kevin was quiet then. "You always believed that doing things the right way protected you." "I still do," Elaine said. "It just doesn't protect me from people who don't." She walked out without looking back. Malcolm's suspension was resolved when the facilities management office traced the original complaint to an email address registered to a communications consulting firm with ties to Cascade's board. He was offered his custodian position back. He accepted that, and also a second offer, a facilities coordinator role with a non-profit health infrastructure group rebuilding its oversight team in the wake of the audit. The position paid more and involved fewer nights alone in empty buildings. He told Opal, who said that was good because she needed him home more, and also that he still could not get a hamster. The 2 community health clinics were not converted. Under a new interim Cascade board, the original utilization data was restored. The community care framework was reinstated, and both facilities received a 3-year operating commitment from the Provincial Health Authority. A third clinic in a neighborhood that had sat on the original framework's expansion list for 4 years received conditional approval to open. Elaine did not return to Cascade as chief medical officer. She spent 3 months stabilizing the organization under interim leadership, then stepped aside. When the board offered her the permanent position, she declined. "You fought to get back in," the interim chair told her. "I fought for the right to choose," she said. "Those aren't the same thing." She took her father's notebooks and 6 years of her own editions and established a consulting practice, helping under-resourced health facilities build programs for the populations most likely to be overlooked. She called it First Listen Health Consulting. She did not hold a launch event. The night before the third clinic's groundbreaking, Elaine sat at Malcolm's kitchen table while Opal showed her the hockey arena, now complete and reinforced and sitting inside a case for the regional student architecture fair. "It didn't fall," Opal said. "No," Elaine agreed. "It didn't." Opal studied the case for a moment. You really did know about foundations. Malcolm set 3 mugs of tea on the table and said nothing. He had learned that Elaine's silences were not empty. At the groundbreaking ceremony, a city councilor invited Elaine to speak. She declined twice. On the 3rd request, Opal took her hand with the quiet authority of a 10-year-old who has decided that adult hesitation is a problem she is going to solve, and walked her toward the front. Elaine looked out at the assembled crowd. Community members, clinic staff, health workers, families who had used the clinics for years without knowing how close they had come to losing them. She did not speak about Kevin. She did not speak about the board meeting, the fabricated documents, or the 9 nights in the pharmacy parking lot. She spoke about her father, who had driven to remote communities in Saskatchewan for 30 years because he believed geography was not a reason to receive less care. She spoke about the notebook. She spoke about what it meant to build something on an honest foundation versus an impressive one. Then she looked at Malcolm, standing in the 2nd row with Ruth beside him. Last January, she said, someone found me in a parking lot at 1:30 in the morning and offered nothing more than warmth and honesty, at a point when I had stopped believing those things were still available. She paused. He didn't know who I was. He helped anyway. That kind of faith, in a stranger in a cold parking lot, at no benefit to himself, is not a small thing. It is, in fact, the same principle that makes a community health clinic worth protecting. The belief that a person's circumstances don't determine what they deserve to receive. Malcolm looked at his boots. Opal beamed. Ruth straightened her coat. Afterward, Elaine found Malcolm near the clinic entrance, reading the name plaque on the door. "How does it feel?" he asked. She thought about the 9 nights in the SUV, about Kevin's face when she read his email into the public record, and the particular stillness that followed. Not triumph, but the removal of a weight she had carried so long she had mistaken it for part of herself. "Honest," she said. Malcolm considered that good start. They walked to the parking lot together, his pickup and her SUV side by side out of long habit, as mismatched as they had always been and as indifferent to the fact as their owners had eventually become. Inside the SUV, her father's notebook sat on the passenger seat. She opened it to the first page on the drive home and read the line she had read 10,000 times and understood differently each time. First, listen. She had believed for most of her career that the instruction was about medicine, about hearing a patient clearly before deciding on a diagnosis. But sitting at -22 in a pharmacy parking lot with nothing left to protect and nothing left to perform, she had heard something she hadn't known she was listening for. A quiet knock on a car window, offered freely, from someone who expected nothing back. She had not saved herself by becoming harder than the people who had tried to erase her. She had saved herself by refusing to become them. The woman who had nowhere left to go had discovered that the only places worth building were the ones where people felt safe enough to stop pretending they were fine. And it had taken an ordinary man in a government services jacket, standing on cold pavement in the middle of a January night, to remind her that she had always known how to build those places. She just needed someone to knock on the window first.